President Tómasdóttir, Ambassador Atlason, Excellencies, dear students, faculty, staff, and friends of the Hertie School, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you here. I wanted to say on a warm autumn day, but it's a bit rainy, and to extend a welcome to Berlin and to the Hertie School, because we're deeply honored to have you with us today, President Tómasdóttir, in order to speak about responsible leadership, a topic that is very dear to us here at the Hertie School, where our mission is to train and educate the decision makers of tomorrow in the policy sector, in the private sector, and in civil society. As a University of Governance in Berlin, we have always understood leadership as more than the act of steering people, but we're striving towards a comprehensive understanding of the world we live in to promote positive change. In order to do so, it is crucial to take into account different experiences, viewpoints, and needs. Through our graduate programs, we strive to bring together students from today over 90 countries and to teach them that they need to recognize their diversity of backgrounds as an asset that will help us to tackle the issues we face in an increasingly complex environment through creativity, through innovation, and most importantly, through collaboration. In this context, the concept of responsible leadership takes on paramount importance. President Tómasdóttir, I can hardly think of a better discussion partner for this topic than you. You have been a transformative force and strong advocate in advancing sustainability, diversity, and accountability in leadership throughout your impressive career. Before becoming President of Iceland on the 1st of August of this year, you served as CEO of the B Team, a non-profit organization of business and civil society leaders that works to create new norms of corporate leadership today for a better tomorrow. Before that, you have held several leadership roles and board positions, among others as the first female CEO of the Icelandic Chamber of Commerce. During your presidential campaign, you have advocated for an equal society that puts humans and nature first, and that values integrity, education, and entrepreneurship. Your career path proves that you have lived up to these values. For example, by co-founding multiple financial service firms such as Sisters Capital and Order Capital that emphasize responsible investment and the empowerment of women in business. You were also on the founding team of Reykjavik University, where you established the executive education department and helped educate the next generation of leaders as an assistant professor at the business school. You certainly have an impressive entrepreneurial spirit, but also a solid business background with an international MBA from Thunderbird School of Global Management and early career experience in corporate America working for Mars and Pepsi Cola. Your successful career across multiple sectors gives you a unique perspective on the most pressing issues of our times, but also reflects the value we uphold here at the Hertie School, where we strive to bring together stakeholders from business, politics, and civil society, because we believe it takes all three to tackle the most important global challenges we're facing today. And we're so honored and thankful that you've taken time out of your busy schedule to discuss these topics with us. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage Halla Tómasdóttir, President of Iceland.
Good morning.
President, you've invited me to call you Halla, so I will.
Please do. That's the way we do it in Iceland.
It does, even in Berlin, take a little bit of adaptation, but Halla, I'm so pleased that you will speak with us, and you've also announced that you do not want to give a long keynote that people have to sit through. You really want to answer questions, and I'm very excited that we will have this free format to discuss with you what responsible leadership really means. Now, most of us, except for some experts in the room that I see from here, but most of us know little of Iceland and became experts a while ago when Iceland made headlines because of the financial crisis that Iceland experienced and because of volcanoes and because of all sorts of other things that are maybe superficial in the news to you. But what I would like to start us off with is this idea that Iceland really has lived through a massive economic meltdown, a crisis that was very important to address. And you did so with a very important change and break in leadership. So the decision to really manage a crisis by thinking about what leadership means. Can you tell us about how you managed to deal with the financial meltdown in Iceland and what role leadership played during that moment?
So we're starting with the small stuff. Thank you so much for welcoming me this morning. This is actually my favorite thing to do, to speak to the next generation about responsible leadership or future fit leadership. And I'll be very humble here to begin with. I am not sure, I think we learned powerful lessons in Iceland and hopefully in the world from the financial crisis that hit all of us, but Iceland particularly hard. But I don't think we learned enough. So I just want to start there, because I think you will find as we have our conversation this morning that I think we have yet to learn some lessons. But we did learn some valuable lessons in Iceland, and I would maybe sum it up in a short description that we learned that sameness can be very dangerous. What do I mean by that? I mean that that following the financial crisis, I think we emphasized diversity and diversification of our economy, which was very, very helpful and important to do. See, if everybody in leadership looks and feels the same, has the same lived experiences, the same gender, same age, you're going to have groupthink. You're not going to have many people who ask the important questions. And I'm sorry to say the financial sector in particular, which was over 90% of our stock exchange before the financial collapse, was a lot of the same. Everybody in finance, similar backgrounds, a great lack of diversity, not just from a gender perspective, but even from a generational perspective, even from, and then I mean both older wisdom and younger, fresher eyes. And I think we almost stopped asking the important questions. And I think that happens, and we have many cases in history where this has happened. So the reason I say we haven't learned enough is that I think the financial sector is still overwhelmingly male and masculine values. So there's nothing wrong, and I'd like to really emphasize this in the beginning. I think this is important because I want to talk about diversity quite a bit here today, is that talking about women versus men is not always helpful, because it feels like we're trying to pit the genders against each other. And I think we have some backlash to diversity in the world, gender diversity in particular, because of that. Gender, to me, is a much more powerful concept than whether we are women or men. It's about the ideas that are at the heart of our economy and at the heart of leadership models. And they have, until now, been competition at the expense of everything that matters. Competing to win at the expense of how nature survives or thrives, how people survive and thrive. There's this idea that we will solve everything with competition. And right now, we're in a world where we need so much more collaboration, so much more compassion, so much more holistic thinking. So whether you are a woman or a man, I think you can embrace a more gender-balanced ideas of what leadership and our economy should look like. And to me, responsible leadership has a lot to do with those ideas. But they come about with the representation of those who think differently. And so women in leadership, young people in leadership, people with different backgrounds, they really do help us avoid the groupthink that I think can lead to dangerous outcomes. But I don't want to miss the point of diversification. I mean, Iceland was until, in recent times, mostly an economy based on fisheries, 80% of our economy. And now we are more diversified, and maybe one of the silver linings of our economic collapse was that tourism, we became famous. You saw the headlines. And so some people say there's no bad publicity. I think actually it was not that great publicity, but we made the front pages and news all over the world. And all of a sudden Iceland became an more interesting destination. It had long been for Germans, but we grew, and now tourism is about 40% of our economy. That's also come with some challenges that we can speak to. And we also really slowly but surely doubled down on entrepreneurship. And we now have a strong entrepreneurial culture, which I believe was always in our DNA, but we now have more investment and focus on creating the new in our economy, which I think is essential to any vibrant economy that wants to be future fit. So I'd say diversity and diversification are two very valuable lessons we learned, and yet I will also just humbly say we did not learn enough. We still don't have, in my opinion, a fully sustainable economy in Iceland or elsewhere, nor enough responsible leadership in Iceland as elsewhere.
Thank you so much. Let me ask one follow-up question, because you talked about the values and the ideas, and I'm sure you've had to answer already to many, but maybe you can also do it for us so we can practice the same arguments. When you say that these diversity is important also for the economic development, I am sure you've met lots of people who say, yes, but what about the bottom line? Is it not going to hurt our business in the end to try to care about nature and gender diversity and everything? What do you tell the skeptics who are concerned about the economic outlook?
The business case of diversity. Well, one real example story is I was the co-founder of an investment firm that we founded in 2007. 2 women initially, and we were an all-female team initially, and our vision was to incorporate more feminine values into the world of finance. And to some, that meant, you know, women's values, but we said more feminine values. And what to us that meant, we wanted to pursue profit with principles. We wanted to consider not just financial capital, but emotional capital. We wanted to not just take excessive risk or be risk averse, we wanted risk awareness. So we had these principles that I think were more gender balanced in the masculine and the feminine. And we did survive the financial meltdown in Iceland intact without losing money for our customers or our own balance sheet. So I think that was a small test of working from a different set of values, more responsible values. The economic theory that Milton Friedman uplifted in 1970 in an essay in New York Times that said the only purpose of business was to pursue profit for shareholders is the one that I have long contested and is the one I think we need to upgrade. I think for a while this delivered prosperity for the world, but for a long time now that prosperity has not been shared prosperity. It's come at the expense of the future that awaits the next generation, because there is no profit to be made on a burning planet with a broken social contract. That's just as simple as that. So I think one of the things I've been passionate about for a long time is gender equality or gender balance, which I like to prefer to use, because of, I think, the definition of success expands when you have a better representation across the gender spectrum. I think your definition of success cannot be what Milton Friedman uplifted, only to pursue more financial profit for shareholders for the short term at the expense of the very things that matter to each of us, which would be living in healthy communities on a healthy planet where all people can thrive. I mean, I don't know anybody who disagrees with that, and yet our economic theory does. But in addition to gender equality, I really think a lot about generational equality, because the lens that we haven't been able to shift in business or in politics is from the short-term orientation to the long-term orientation that we currently need. So we're measuring financial profit for shareholders on a quarterly basis in business if you're a listed company. And of course, if that's what you measure, that's what you lead on. And that isn't going to allow you to put the investment in that is needed to transform and transition companies, our economies, our definition of success, because you need to invest for the long term to be able to continue to deliver. So even if you believe in Milton Friedman, I think you need a new definition of success to be able to continue to deliver financial profit for shareholders for the long term. It's the short-termism that is the cancer, I think, in politics and business. And the capital markets, which is why I'm grateful for the experience I had in the world of finance, because it's very helpful to understand how the incentives are really all wrong. And they are not going to do right by the next generation who stands to inherit a world in a big mess because of a definition that we keep teaching and in business schools everywhere, and is simply not future fit.
So you have worked...
I left, just let me add one thing. You said the business case. because I'm making the societal, like, grander case. The business case is very clear. We have more innovation when we have gender-balanced leadership and generationally balanced, I might add. So the creativity and the innovation that it unlocks it's the motor that any company or a board needs right now. We have a bigger definition of success. We have higher sales growth, higher profits. The business case is absolutely there. But what is maybe the circular argument that academics are struggling with is what comes first? That you decide to be a future fit company and truly embrace diversity, or you embrace diversity and that delivers a future fit company. We could argue till the end of day, but either way, if you want to be future fit, you need to embrace diversity in leadership, and sameness can be the most dangerous strategy a company or a political party can choose.
Thank you. I mentioned the different steps of your career, and these are all things that people in the room aspire to. And from corporate America to the Icelandic financial sector to now the presidency, I am sure you've met many people who've inspired you personally. So I would like to talk about role models. What were moments where you were thinking, this is how I want to define responsible leadership, because you've seen something that made a difference?
Well, first, to my early experiences just after my MBA, and let me compliment you at the Hertie School for already being designed around sort of anti-siloed education, because I think that is problem in education, that we're working too much in silos, and I think you're onto something really important here with teaching people to be more holistic leaders, which I think is important. I want to start with the short-termism and my early experiences, because I worked for initially Mars, the confectionery company, early in my career, and it was a privately owned company at the time, the second largest privately owned company in the world at the time. And then later I worked for Pepsi-Cola North America, then the biggest listed company in the stock exchange, and had more employees than inhabitants in Iceland, which was quite humbling for a small girl from Iceland. But I learned something really powerful back then, and that is this issue of how do you practice responsible, principled leadership in a company that is in the capital market environment, because Mars, privately owned, had 5 principles of Mars, and the organizational culture really supported making decisions that would last generations, because they were always trying to transition the company to the next generation. So they had a real long-term principled approach to how they grew the company, and even today are still very responsible on many fronts when it comes to climate, well-being of people, and lots of issues, even if they, as everyone else, needs to do much better. But when I came to Pepsi-Cola, they also had sort of a screen, they called it, a set of values that they really believed in, and they sounded beautiful. But when push came to shove, it was about delivering internal rate of return of 15% to be able to support a stock price for the short term. And so I learned from great companies, and yes, innovation and transformation and new thinking was really stronger at Pepsi in many ways, but the principles and the moral compass, which I often talk about, was so much stronger at Mars. And it's been interesting to me to watch, this was back in the 90s, how difficult it is for leaders to lead responsibly in a broken system that measures a too narrow, a too short term of a definition of success. And yet, the markets do require innovations and do things. So I'm not sure I have come to conclude that being publicly listed company is terrible and being privately owned company is better. I've actually come to conclude that we need to shift the definition of success and the time horizon to create organizational cultures that are supportive of a world that is well, both in terms of planetary and people health. And so I go back to that example because I think Peter Drucker was right when he said organizational culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's just so true. And if you don't have the right organizational culture, no matter what good people you put into that structure, they will be unable to do the right thing. And I think maybe the biggest lesson we need to learn in schools like this today is how do you lead in this system that exists, and we all know is broken because it has delivered a world in in a mess. How do you lead responsibly? How do you develop a moral compass and make decisions based upon what you as a human being know to be right, while the expectations in that system are for you to go on with the herd behavior that we developed with old theories decades ago and are no longer serving us? How do you actually do that? This is the dilemma, I think, of leadership today. And CBS is a business school in Copenhagen that you might look to. They've recently developed something called the Nordic Nines, and it's very much about helping people understand how leadership today is all about dilemmas and dealing with very wicked problems. And there's plenty of them, and they're all interdependent and challenging. And it is going to be impossible for you to be truly successful if you just go with what has always been done without a moral compass. And it might also be nearly impossible to have a strong moral compass, a set of purpose and principles in your very own heart, and be able to live that out because the brokenness in the system and the incentives are not right. And this is not easy, but I believe school needs to become much more about helping us with this dilemma. And I think you're doing a great job here with being a new school at Hertie, but I think this is still difficult, and I don't think anyone really has the answers as to how to do this. It's tough. It's not easy to be a leader today.
We talked about female leadership, but I'd like to ask a bit more specifically also about being a woman in politics. Iceland's first female president was elected in 1980. So one may say you're already giving us lessons in being a progressive country that other countries such as France or the United States have yet to show us that they're able to do it, and we're looking at next month, of course, in particular. But I imagine that even in Iceland, there's still some double burden and some challenges to being a woman in politics. And so I would like to see if for our female students in the room, you have some advice on how to master that particular challenge.
Yes. The reason I talk a lot about gender balance is I think the advice I want to give you is not in particular to the women, although I will definitely share the fact that being a female leader is different in so many different ways. One example I often cite for fun is that I've barely shown up in a jacket in Iceland for a speech without the conversation being about my jacket and not what I said. And so I don't think men have to deal with this. And it's quite exhausting for us women to, and probably my shoes this time around, anything. And so it's a different reality to be a woman in leadership. But I think us women who have sort of been early movers, I have often been the only woman on a board or in the room talking about climate or in a room of CEOs, has often been sort of, we've had sort of two choices. To copy the rules of the game and try to lead like men, and then we might belong and the conversation in the boardroom might not move to the bathroom, which it often does when you are a difficult woman in the boardroom. I can assure you, I've had lots of experiences with that. So one way the first women have dealt with that is they try to lead like a man. And I think I did in my 20s in particular. But I came to a point in time where I realized that I had gifts, or at least some modest talents, that weren't really being applied in the world of business. And I thought, if I continue to lead like a man, or like it's always been done, I'm never truly going to unlock the full power of who I am. So I think the biggest advice I have for you is, no matter if you're a woman or a man, and I will speak specifically to some of the burden for women leaders, is to lead like you, is to refuse to lead the way it's always been done. Because if we buy into leading the way it's always been done, we will continue to accelerate a problematic world, because clearly it is not working. We have a planetary crisis, unsustainable levels of inequality, mis and disinformation that are wreaking a havoc on our democracies. The multilateral system is breaking down. We're at war in 50 places around the world. We talk more about 2 of them than any others. I don't understand, and our mental well-being is as bad as it's ever been, and yet we are more prosperous than we've ever been. So something is broken. So do not buy into leading like it's always been done. Lead like you, whether you're a man or a woman. Bring your whole authentic self into leadership, and you will become far more powerful than copying what others have done. And that does not mean role models don't matter, because they do. And I think we need to rethink what leadership looks like in this time. And to your earlier question, women in Iceland showed me when I was only 7 years old what leadership can look like. They went on a strike for a day. They refused to do any work, paid or unpaid, that day. And that day, nothing worked in Iceland. I mean, literally, children did not eat. Hot dogs sold out in the stores because that was what men could cook at the time. At the time. So I think those women, they showed up in solidarity and sisterhood and joy that I had never seen before. And it gave me this idea that leadership could be collaborative, shared endeavor, joyful endeavor, that the world can be changed with collective leadership, not individual heroic leaders, which is maybe the idea we always have about leadership. And so my other message to all of you, women and men, is there is a leader inside of each of us. Leadership is not given through positions of power. Leadership is given to each of us. And right now, at this very moment in history, who are we not to show up and apply our full leadership, our full inner truth, to making a difference in a world in desperate need of positive impact? So I think we need to rethink leadership away from being only something we can carry if we are given the opportunity to sit in positions of power, to be more shared, more collective, more collaborative. And I think the women in Iceland showed me that. And 5 years later, we were first to democratically elect a woman as president, because you can't be what you can't see. But all of a sudden, we saw that the world doesn't work very well when women are not at work. As a matter of fact, it just didn't work at all that day in Iceland. Maybe we need a global women's strike. I've said that for a long time. Or young people strike, and we've seen that in the climate movement. Now, to the specific women challenges, outside of people having more interest in your packaging than what you have to say in the media and social media in particular, which is real, and we should just talk about it, my best answer is choose your partner wisely. And my partner is here with me today, and he's a chef. He was in the world of finance and decided and was a wealth manager and decided to become more of a health manager, which I think is a much better definition of success for life, to do something about that. But it takes an awful lot of courage to be a husband of something like this, you know? You gotta be very comfortable in your own skin. And I needed to go younger. Maybe I should advise you that, because at least at my age, men had trouble with a woman like me. So I needed to choose a 5-year younger partner in life. There was a generational difference there, and I hope your generation doesn't struggle in the same way with the gender differences. But I think having a partner, whether you're is incredibly important if you want to have it all. We have 2 adult children now, and it's not always been easy. And the question, can women have it all, be in leadership and become mothers and have friends and hobbies and whatever else we need to be thriving adults, is to me that yes, you can have it all, but maybe not all at the same time. It's a balancing act, but you need a partner. And that partner can be your mother, your sister, your wife, your husband, your best friend. But you need a partner, I think, to stay the course, because it is the weight that women in leadership carry. Additionally, in addition to how hard it is to be in leadership, is considerable. And I would just suggest that all of you start thinking about that, because the way we talk about women leaders differs dramatically from the way we talk about male leaders. And we collectively let that live. And so a woman can't have the right level. Her voice is too like this or that. She's too timid or too strong. A woman somehow can't be right. She's always damned if she does and doomed if she doesn't. And that's a very difficult line to thread. And I actually think this line is true for people of diverse backgrounds as well, people who bring difference to bear. So it's not just a women's experience, but women are about half of humanity and a little bit more. So I think when we get gender-balanced leadership, the culture changes for everyone, for young people, for people of color, for people of different religions, sexual orientation, people who neurodiversity-wise think differently. I think it becomes better for everybody because the sort of culture becomes more inclusive, and that otherness that people who are different bring is not as visible. It becomes normal, which is partly why I'm proud to be the second woman democratically elected as president, because when we choose one, which we've done in many places around the world, we typically go back to the norm, which is next we go back to a male leader. And in Iceland, we did that for 28 years. So the fact that Icelanders, 75% of them voted for women candidates in our presidential election in May, on June 1st, is something I'm incredibly proud of. Because that just means that we are normalizing that a president can look like this and be like this. And partners might even consider having a wife like this.
Thank you very much. I have more questions, but I really want to open it up and collect questions from the room. So if you would also like to address Halla with one of your concerns, raise your hand. We have mics that go around. And if you grab one, then please stand up, present yourself, and ask your question.
First of all, thank you so much for being here today. It's a huge honor. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and a few years back, we benefited from the growth in the airlines from Iceland that brought many of us to Iceland for the first time. But this also represents a perhaps too large growth of tourism, and which has very detrimental effects. And I wanted to ask how you've balanced airlines like Icelandair and Play and WOW that have this stopover thing, have introduced so much tourism with preservation of local communities and the environment in Iceland.
Thank you. What a good question. I thought you were going to ask me what was going to happen in the US election. I'm very glad you asked about tourism in Iceland. Much easier question to respond to. And I lived in the Midwest as an exchange student in the United States, so I feel kindred spirits here. Growth in tourism has brought economic diversification and great opportunities in Iceland, but it's also brought its challenges. I don't think we've been strategic enough in taking care of what most people come to Iceland to experience, our nature. And I think we've not distributed tourists around because we live in 1% of the country. 99% is wasteland, very valuable, beautiful wasteland. But most of the tourists sort of came to a triangle of locations an hour away from Reykjavik or so. And we have so many parts of the country that are not just wonders to explore, but would also help sustainable development in those areas. We've had a massive housing challenge with this. We grew faster than any other OECD country since the tourist boom started, and we had to import a lot of the employees. That sort of tested both the housing market, our social fabric, our sense of self, because also why do people want to visit Iceland? They want to experience Iceland and Icelanders and Icelandic communities. So I think we've had many of those challenges with the success that this has been. Frankly, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the government when I say this, I think this is where we have maybe been plagued by short-termism a little bit. The opportunities to rebuild with a massive growth in tourism has maybe come at the expense of really being strategic and thinking long-term how we wanted to do it, what we wanted to stand for. If we could ask the tourists that come to the country that are close to 10 times our population to contribute to the infrastructure that is needed to protect nature and our communities, and the fact that we continue to be an authentic place to visit. We've been unsuccessful in having that conversation to the level that I think I personally aspire to, and I think most Icelanders do as well. So it's a young and nascent industry that's brought growth at the expense of some things that truly matter. But I think we realize it now, and we're starting to have more longer-term conversations about who we want to be in this world and how we make sure that our tourism reflects that as well. Because without protecting nature and the communities, our locals will become increasingly hostile towards it, and we see some evidence of that. And our nature will pay the price. And we, as a small nation, we just don't have enough resources to really build the infrastructure to do this right. So we need to come to some kind of a modest agreement that there is a contribution from our visitors to do this better. And I hope we will succeed with that, because otherwise it's not going to be a sustainable industry for us. And our young people are very mad right now because we have high interest rates and inflation, and it's very difficult to get into, afford either rent or getting into your first place because we've expanded faster than the housing supply. So there's all kinds of challenges that we have. I'm just going to be honest, but I aspire to learn from places like Bhutan and Costa Rica and others who have really placed sustainability at the heart of how we think about it. And I think there's a growing movement of those within the industry and beyond the industry that understand that we need to do this well in order for it to be a sustainable pillar of our economy for the long term. So call it growing pains right now. Thank you for a good question.
I see one in the back.
Hi, my name is Paul. And I have a question for you as a politician, but also as a businesswoman. You already mentioned that it's becoming more expensive to live. How can we, especially as students, demand companies to remunerate for internships so that we can make a living while furthering our practical education?
Could you repeat the last part, because I don't think I understand one of your words. How can you as students...
Like demand companies to pay us for internships so we can afford living while also collecting practical education?
Wow, that's a very challenging question. It's interesting to me that you emphasize here at this school applied learning. And I personally think that one of the ways we need to rethink education is we need to diminish the boundaries between where you are learning and not just make it within institutions or campuses, but also within businesses. And I think businesses need to relearn a lot of things right now and go back to school, because so much of what we learned, particularly if we went to traditional business schools, is no longer fit for purpose. So I would like to suggest that maybe one way to really help students be able to learn, whether they are within businesses or within schools and want to have some more real-life experiences, is to partner a lot more powerfully between the private sector and educational institutions. And maybe even go further between the public sector as well, because if there's one thing you said in your introduction that really resonates with me, that the global challenges we are dealing with, they actually require a whole of society approach and whole of the world approach to solve them. You can't solve climate change within just government or just private sector or just with activists or citizens on the street. It actually takes all of us to be able to solve that challenge. And so I think we need to kind of rethink the silos we've been living in. And I think that could be a fruitful ground for bringing people who are students into rethinking so much that's going on in business for a salary while learning, and vice versa, to bring businesses into the school setting to relearn and bring back some new thinking to what I often feel like are outdated corporate cultures and ways of doing things. So I think it has to do with partnering and rethinking what a school is. School of life has taught me at least as much as my formal education. And I've also met a lot of people in the school of life who need to go back to school, honestly. So I think it's something somewhere along there. And I think you have an interesting model here because of the applied way that you're willing to test things and do things. And I would like to see a lot more real cases embedded within the university setting, and I think businesses would be willing to pay for that. And I think this could be a helpful way to think about earning your way through learning your way.
Thank you. More hands. I see one here all the way on the left. I see in the middle at least 3. Maybe we take 2 questions at a time to make sure we get.
Hi. First of all, thank you for being here. It's been very inspiring to listen to you. My question is a little more Iceland specific, I'd say. And it's about what would you say sets Iceland apart in how it thinks about leadership from other countries? Because from my experience with living in Sweden, there's, in the whole Scandinavia, there's this kind of different outlook on work and work-life balance and leadership. And I was wondering if there's anything specific you'd say about Iceland.
And maybe we'll take a second question. Don't forget to present yourself in the beginning as well, but don't, so we can know where you're coming from.
Hi there, my name is Christine May. I'm from ECP Berlin. This is Pete. He doesn't have a job yet. Well, first of all, it just gives me a lot of hope, which puts a lot of burden, I think, also on your shoulders, to hear somebody in power speak the way you do, right? Gives me a lot of hope. And I do wonder, you touched upon a few things already, but how were you able to become powerful or to get into a role of power?
Nice to see Pete here with us. This is actually who I try to work for, you know. So thank you, Pete, for joining us today. Starting with the uniqueness of Iceland and maybe more broadly the Nordics, what can we learn from them? I sometimes say that the Nordic region is modeling capitalism with care, meaning that the well-being of people and nature is somehow more in our DNA than at least for someone who kind of came into her own in corporate America. There's a very big difference, I think, in the way that we think about what success is. And maybe the uniqueness of Iceland is that we are so few that each of us matters. So nobody is sort of insignificant. Maybe this has helped us support the fact that we believe in empowering all of our people and not just half or even less than that. So I think that's helped, and it's also helped in a way that we are a little bit unafraid to be jack of all trades. We don't have deep expertise in many things. It just we are very good at maybe being able to see the big picture and try different things within our society, because the competition for talent may be a little bit higher than the competition for jobs. I don't know if you follow what I'm saying, but sometimes when we're trying to compete for jobs, we try to become deeper and deeper and deeper expertise in big societies. And right now, I still think that's very important, and Iceland will never excel at it, I think. But we do kind of do well with having a range of different work and life experiences that allows us to see the big picture. And that has increasingly become critical in a world facing interdependent challenges that are all related. So I think there's some uniqueness that comes from us being so few and almost like manageable. For example, in the financial sector, some of our people were able to understand how that whole system works better than deep experts within the system in bigger countries. So I think there's some benefit to it, but I would say the biggest gift that we have in the Nordics is that we place the well-being of people and nature at the heart of how we think about things, much more so than much of the rest of the world. So I think that's truly unique. And maybe one additional wild thing that Iceland has, I think that the other Nordics may not have in the same amount, we're a little crazy. And you know, I sometimes call us the Latino Nordics. You know, we're a little crazy. And what do I mean by that? Crazy is actually good. I think we need to redefine crazy, because being a conformist today is not the way to go. If we are a conformist today, we will just continue to do things the way they've been done, and that clearly isn't working. So there's a little bit of that crazy creativity in Icelanders, that maybe Mother Nature being so new to us, still creating new land, still inspiring us with its awness, that makes us inspired to think things anew a little more than elsewhere. I at least like to think that there's a bit of a creative genius inside of us because of Mother Nature being so inspirational to us. So I think that's good. Now, how did I come to a position of power? By owning my own power. Because, I mean, yes, education got me my first jobs, but I think I advanced by owning my own power. By realizing, and it sort of happened when I became a mother of a son and a daughter and was a teacher at the university and worked with a lot of young people and was running a women empowerment initiative that was really eye-opening to me. I saw all this talent, all this passion, all this creativity being wasted. And I thought, this is crazy. And I saw that they did things differently. And so I think I started to come into my own in my 30s and really own who I am. And how if I bring all of that to bear, that is success to me, even if it isn't to others. And you know what? Authenticity and sincerity works. There is much more appetite for it than there is supply of it. So own who you are. Bring truly yourself. And it might not give you the immediate positions of power, but it will give you immense power because there are so few that dare to. So I would say that that's been key for me more than any other. And choosing really carefully, maybe the other piece, not just my partner in life, but who I partner with on the journey of owning my own power. People who have shared values, but bring me difference in every other way. Help me stay real, help me stay humble. And frankly, I need to add this because I know many of you will know this, owning my imposter. Because I have imposter thoughts like everyone who's done anything in life. I thought I was alone with it for a long time. I thought no one else is suffering this self-doubt and imposter thoughts, but we all are. We're just human beings who want to be seen, valued, and heard, and we're imperfect. And I think owning my imposter and turning it into a roommate who is sometimes very tiring, always in my head. Who are you to run for president? Who are you to become mom? Like, you're going to be the worst mom in the world. And like all the thoughts that I've had in my head I've learned to own them as a fairly critical and not always a nice friend, but it helps me stay humble. It helps me surround myself with people who are better than me. It helps me be me. Because I decided not to fight it, but befriend it and see it as an asset. And I tried to drop from my roommate because he, and it is a he, I'm sorry, it is. He lives in my head and not in my heart. And in my heart, I can find courage, sincerity, authenticity, what I really care about, passion, purpose, principles, all the things that matter. So it's also been about what school did not give me. Training the biggest untrained and least trained muscle in any one of our bodies, the heart muscle, which we undertrain and underestimate the power of in business, politics, and beyond.
Thank you so much. That was a very valuable set of advices, and I'm very happy also to hear you speak of imposter syndrome that so many people suffer from and think that they're by themselves with it. If you're suffering from it, and my favorite also Jodie Foster is suffering from it when she won her Oscar and was waiting for weeks that somebody knocked on her door saying this was for Meryl Streep, we have to take it back. You realize you're not alone and you should own it, so thank you for this. I saw at least 3 hands in the middle and I'd like to collect at least 2 and maybe then we have another round, but let's hear from the middle.
Working? Right.
Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Bjarne Schinzel. I'm a student here at Hertie School as well. And first of all, I want to thank you very much for putting such emphasis on diversity. Meanwhile, far too often the discourse is not at all about diversity, but against it. We all see the surge of the discourse about people saying that or not even being reachable by something like a business case for diversity, but going very strongly against it. We've seen it in most European countries, in the Nordic countries as well. I mean, we had the coalition breakup in Iceland. We've got something in far-right government in Sweden, and also here in Germany, we've got this surge of this very specific narrative. What would you recommend how to deal with that, and what are your feelings about this?
And let me add a second question. I saw one in the front, if we can get the mic to the front as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am Nancy, and I am also a student from the Hertie School. You were talking about how leadership looks like, and I was also wondering, like, what skills would you prioritize for having a gender balanced leadership or a collective leadership?
I think these questions can actually be related. A very, a challenging question about kind of what I think you're asking me about is we are experiencing a bit of a backlash to some of the progressive values that we have gained ground on in recent decades. And in recent years in particular, we've seen a backlash. Am I interpreting you correctly? And also to your capabilities. I have fought a lot or to catalyze greater gender balance and generational justice and equity in my work. And I think what I have come to learn that our mistake in that movement, which I am partly guilty of too, has been the failure to include men. That we're trying to catalyze a gender revolution with mostly women. Because a gender revolution cannot happen by only having half of the world at the table, or even a portion of that. We need men at the table. And why do I say that? I think because the human need is to be valued, seen, and heard, and everyone wants to, I think men, and maybe in particular young men, have started to feel like, as we focus on empowering women and girls, which we need to, because we are not in a gender-balanced world. 95% of CEOs of big companies are still men. 95% of heads of state are still men, and I can go on. So we're not in a gender-balanced world, so we need to focus on bringing more women and girls into the rooms where we design and decide on the future. But while doing so, I think a lot of men have started to wonder if they are valued, seen, and heard in this world. And I think when that happens to any group, they're gonna, and during social change, they're going to start to object and feel like, oh, this is no longer about me. It starts to feel like a zero-sum game, whereas more women and girls being empowered means that we are less empowered. And I don't think it needs to be like that. And what I am particularly proud of in Iceland's story here is that we were first to give equal paternity and maternity leave. Like that really empowered women and men in the workplace, but also in the home. And that really makes a difference for the child, for the workplace, for career advancement, and how you think about it as a business person. If it doesn't make a difference anymore who might leave to do the caring work, then all of a sudden you start to think about the talent that people bring more than if somebody is going to leave for a while. And so I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of the fact that we started to conduct barbershop breakfasts and lunches and conversations with only men, where we talked about the gender revolution in a room full of men in power in many cases. And I think that was really transformative, and we need to do more of that. We had conversations about what is the difference between being a real man and a good man. And what is this idea that real men have to be somehow emotionally unavailable to their children or their loved ones, or have to be like tough instead of meeting hard times with the softness, care, and compassion they call for. So I think there's a whole area in the gender revolution that we failed at. And I think it would probably, if we had done a better job of that, prevented both the backlash and the extreme polarization that we're seeing, to be honest. So I think this is the next era of the gender revolution, to bring men and women much more together into this revolution, because it's a values revolution more than a sex revolution to me. So I hope that gives you some thinking, and I think we've got our work cut out for us, and I think Iceland should lead on this as we have in empowering women, because I think this is very important. And I think in the US, where I lived during my last leadership role, we've definitely seen this play out in just the most horrible ways, that men who have felt really left behind find no other way to be seen than to be pretty radical. And I don't think that's been helpful. Now, so to the characteristics, I think it's related, because I actually think we need to teach character. now. Like, we need to teach people how to work with themselves, how to work with the heart muscle, how to drop from our, I mean, we're so over rationalizing education that we are underemphasizing in most schools. I think you're doing far better here than in most other schools I know of, in helping people work with themselves, regulate emotions. How do you deal with the fact that you know when something is wrong, but you also know that doing it in the wrong way is going to advance your career? How do you make those decisions? I think we need to really train people to find the inner empowerment, how you change your inner world in order to be able to show up in strength and resilience to help impact positively the outer world. And I think we are failing at this. This needs to start in elementary school, and we're not doing a good job at this. And we need to re-emphasize it as we grow up and develop ourselves, because I think self-awareness, self-regulation, being able to deal with the emotions we're feeling in a different way than increasing our anxiety and depression and loneliness and all of the other things that we're seeing is maybe the foundation of the education that we need for the times we live in. And so teaching character is something that I don't know anybody with a faculty in character development, but I think we need that almost like sustainability and design thinking should probably cross everything we're learning, no matter what our discipline. And I would say developing ourselves and being able to survive these crazy times we're living through is paramount to being educated today.
Thank you. Let me take some more questions.
I'm a physicist, and I have a linguistic question. Could you say some words about the role of the Nordic languages? As I understand it, you speak also some of the others. Do you have the same narrative in these languages? Or could it be that you do not have these bubbles? I mean, my background is, a year ago, I'm German, I started to listen to Czech media, and I have the impression that in the smaller language spaces, you have a kind of protection against some of these bubbles.
Wow, that is I'm way out of my expertise here, and clearly in your expertise. But I wanna recognize the fact that I have sometimes struggled. Icelanders are very particular about our language. We're very proud of this Germanic language, the oldest unchanged language. We can read books from the 900s or the 1200s and almost unchanged, whereas the other Nordic countries cannot. And so we're very proud of it. So when a new innovation comes about, think telephone or computer, most languages pick up a version of telephone or computer, but in Iceland we have a whole committee that digs into a really, truly Icelandic word for it. And we're proud of this. We also have a
So we need to know what a computer is called in Icelandic.
Yeah, tölva. It's something that shows you numbers. Like that's how we would. And telephone is sími. Which, I'm sorry, I'm going to need somebody's help to understand how they came up with that one. But we really, and we have a naming committee, so you cannot name your children what you want. It needs to, go to the naming committee, and it needs to conjugate according to the Icelandic language in order to be approved. And so some would say that this is very conformist and holds back, progressive, inclusive values, etc. But I'm proud of this fact. But I will, at the same time, tell you that I have been working in the climate, environmental, sustainability, inclusion, new rules for the economy place for a long time, and I am severely lacking Icelandic vocabulary on this front, and I know this to be true for my Danish, Norwegian, Finnish, and Swedish friends. They talk about the fact that we don't really have some of the language or the wording or the phrasing for some of what is happening. So I don't know if that's different between our languages, because I can speak what we call Nordisk språk or Blandinavian, which is some kind of a mess of what Danish we learned in school, a little Norwegian because we know Old Norse, and some Swedish that we may have heard from TV. I mean, it's not very advanced ability to communicate. So I recently chose in Denmark, visiting with the new king and queen, to speak Danish, Icelandic, and English in my speech. And the one language where I felt like we were on the level playing field was in English, because at least there we were all in the same secondary language, not some people kind of really comfortable and other people trying to sound like adults speaking what felt like a very underdeveloped ability to do so. Particularly for Finnish and Icelandic people, it is challenging to be on the same level playing field. So all of this to say, but I will say this, socially, and when I went to the parliament, I spoke only Danish. It really does matter to the identity of the Nordics that we have this common language. So I have a lot of respect for that. But I do think our somewhat old languages and similar languages, they have developed further apart than you would think. I mean, when I meet Norwegians, I can speak something closer to Old Norse than they can. They have, and Danes, I learned Danish in school 30, 40 years ago, and I swear to God, the Danish I learned is not what they speak in Denmark today. Like, it has sounds and like way of speaking that, like, I don't even know if they understand each other. And I know there are famous Norwegian comedians who actually do very well with just making fun of that Danes don't even understand each other, the way they speak. So there's all kinds of joking that happens within our region, but I would say our languages generally don't have the rich vocabulary around many of the new things that are coming about. And I sometimes wonder if Icelanders will struggle with this more than others, because we are very strict about our language, which I want us to be, but it also presents some challenges. How are we going to find new true Icelandic words for everything new that is currently being invented in a world that is going to invent almost everything we know in the next few decades? It could be a challenge for us. So I'm not sure I'm even touching upon your deep expertise here, but just offering few thoughts. You could probably teach me a thing or two about this.
Thank you so much. Let me take a last question. Oh, every time I say last, I get 6 hands. Let me take 2 last questions, and then we will wrap up.
Thank you for being so good with questions. I love that.
First of all, thank you so much for being here. It's truly an honor. My name is Henrik. I'm from Brazil. And I'm particularly interested in the topic of sustainability, of which you so heartfully talked about. And I'm really interested to hear what is Iceland doing in the global stage to influence the debates on sustainability. I figure as a small nation and as an island, it has particular vulnerabilities and limitations. So what can Iceland do, and what has it been doing to shape the global debate on climate change and sustainability? Thank you.
Thank you, Henrik. Pass the mic. Just in front of you was one more question. Okay. Yep. And we'll take 2.
Good morning. My name is Abhay. I'm from India. And I think in your speech, you talked a lot about doing away with the status quo as you're a leader. And do you think your criticisms perhaps apply to the current form of democracy? And do you think that we as humans can perhaps exercise our imagination in such a way that we can create a new social order that's even better than the current form of liberal democracy?
Easy questions. I'll do those 2. Yeah. Great to have a question from a Brazilian and an Indian. Thank you. Gives us more of a global perspective. And it's very humbling to be an Icelander in a world full of countries with so many people, because we are just under 400,000 people. So our role in the world almost feels arrogant to talk about. We should just be humble. Tiny little place in the North Atlantic that barely knows how to agree on anything within its own society, and not to mention our ability to bring something to the world. But I will, with all that humility, say that I actually think Iceland has a really, really meaningful role and even purpose in the world. And to me, that is to demonstrate what is possible. That is by trying to be a lighthouse for solutions that the world now needs. And it just so happens that in the 1970s, we are so gifted with natural resources that we started the green transition almost 50 years ago, way ahead of everyone else that's trying to figure that out right now. And I'm a plumber's daughter, and my dad's business was to put new geothermal plumbing into how we heat houses. Right here in Germany, we could probably heat 40% or use use geothermal for up to 40% of the energy system right here. And that would be transformative for Germany. And right now we're at somewhere between 1% and 2%. So there's a huge opportunity for Iceland to be a lighthouse and a land of solutions in the energy transition, and in particular, I think, when it comes to geothermal, even if we're good at hydro and starting to look at other energy sources. But we also have led the world for 15 years in gender equality, and you may think this is unrelated, but to me, and maybe this speaks a little bit to the second question, we now live in a very unstable world, and I think the energy transition and empowering women are both the most powerful keys to a more peaceful world. I honestly feel, I'm fairly certain that we would choose peace and not war far more often with greater gender balance in leadership. I am fairly certain that the energy transition is the sustainability transformation is the single most important thing we could focus on in order to take away power from what I call the old power playbook. Because they have power through dirty fuels and means. They wouldn't have it if we transitioned our energy system and could be securely in our own energy and wouldn't be reliant upon those ways. But I want to say something more about the democratic question, because I actually think it's profound. And clearly we are moving away, or we have moved away from a hegemonic world with the leadership of the United States or the bipolar world we had before to a multipolar world. And we don't know quite how to navigate it. And Africa and India and Asia and parts of the world feel like they've not been seen, valued and heard, and are demanding that they should be, and we should listen. I think one of the most important relationships we should be thinking about in Europe is the Europe-Africa relationship, partly because I think we don't need to help Africa as such. I think Africa can help itself, but Africa can help us as well with the energy transition. They have their rare minerals, etc. We need to work with China and India and others on the energy transition, because we can't solve climate change or the environmental planetary crisis without you. So we need to move into almost this sort of new form of global order and a democratic order where we don't think about power over, as I think is the old model, the old playbook, but power through, which is the feminine model to me. It's what women often bring, where we actually bring stakeholders together much more to solve these challenges. And when I say stakeholders, it's across the globe. It's from government to business to citizens and civil society. We need a lot more conversation and co-creation, because none of this can be solved just with regulation or just with entrepreneurship or just with young people getting angry. I mean, we need all of it. But so I think there is a really interesting question you're asking. I don't have all the answers, and I don't think the world has the answers right now. But more women, a faster energy transition, and much more conversation and collaboration as to how we approach these grand challenges together across the world, across the genders, across the stakeholders that are needed is all important part of it, I think. And now I think our youngest member says, this is enough. He's starting to lose faith in his future, as is maybe my single most important message to all of you is you cannot lose hope, because that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I always say when I meet young people, and we're all young if we choose to be, I like to think about myself as young, is that hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up, meaning we cannot ask somebody else to give us hope. But we can find hope in our hearts and in our heads by taking part in bringing about this new world that we want. But we need to roll up our sleeves and not point fingers at someone who's outside the window, and actually face the mirror and ask, what am I gonna do? That is, I think, the most profound question we need to face in these days.
Halla, thank you so much. You also speak German, so I will say ganz herzlichen Dank.
Bitte schön.
This was such a frank and insightful discussion, and I would like all of you to give a round of applause to President Tómasdóttir. Now, we usually invite the Icelandic students to come up for a picture. If you're in the room and you'd like a picture, I know you have to run. Be quick, come up, explain who you are, and maybe that's possible, and then we have to make sure you get to your next appointment. Thank you so much.
Thank you.